Hello Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies. So for those of you who don't watch the Spoony Ones videos, he has been making this series recently called Counter Monkey, in which he tells stories about role-playing games, and he has encouraged other people to tell their stories as well. I have made one such video in the past about the time that our party had a laser rock show dance-off on a shark ship in space. You can watch that video here if you like. So I thought I would share another D&D story with you guys. Now every dungeon master ideally knows their players pretty well, and they also know their players' characters very well, so they can usually predict how that group of characters will handle a given situation generally. But every dungeon master knows that occasionally your players are going to throw you for a loop. They are going to do something that you never thought they would do. They are going to latch onto something that you never in a million years expected them to latch onto. This is the story of one such event, the tale of the Inedible Muffin. This actually happened in the first D&D game that I ever played. We actually had a pretty big group of players for this particular game. I think there was like 7 players plus our DM. And every so often there would be a week when one person was busy and couldn't show up for whatever reason, so we would play it without them. But there was one week where only 3 of us were able to show up. And I actually don't have permission from them to use their names when telling you this story, so just in case they object to that sort of thing for whatever reason, I'm going to use fake names. It was myself, the DM, who we will call Jonathan, and 2 other players who we will call Mark and Carol. I was playing a neutral good sorcerer, Mark was playing a chaotic evil bard, and Carol was playing a neutral evil warlock. So what Jonathan decided to do was, instead of trying to run a game with just the 3 of us contributing to it and advancing the plot, he decided he was basically going to run a prequel game. So it was just going to be a little one-session thing that would actually take place before the events of the current game we were playing. I don't really remember much about this particular one-off session. I just remember we had to fight an undead made out of bird bones. I think it was bird bones. And it was an undead creature, but I think that the mind controlling the undead creature was like some kind of demon or something like that. I'm a little fuzzy on the details. So after we defeated this undead, Mark attempted to loot the corpse for valuables. But the problem is that Jonathan couldn't give us any kind of tangible reward for defeating this thing because it would have affected the main story. So he initially just said, well, you don't find anything. It's just a pile of bird bones. And Mark said, oh, come on, isn't there like anything I can find on this guy? So Jonathan says, okay, you find a muffin. And Mark says, okay, I pick up the muffin and I eat it. And Jonathan, for whatever reason, I don't know why he just grabbed this out of his brain. He could have just said, okay, you eat the muffin, it tastes fine, and that would have been the end of it. But for some reason, he decided to say this: you can't eat the muffin. And Mark says, well, why not? And Jonathan says, well, you try to eat the muffin, but you find that you can't. It is an inedible muffin. And thus was born a running gag that spanned several completely, utterly separate campaigns. Because the thing about Mark's bard, I'll go ahead and use the character name. Mark's bard was named Reginald Moosetovitch, and like there was a number after it, like the 12th or something like that, or Reginald Moosetovitch the 17th or something like that. I don't remember. It was a big number. And he came from a long, long line of Reginald Moostoviches, each one as crazy as the last. Every single Reginald Moosetovitch in this family was completely out of their gourd. And so Mark decided that Reginald was moved by the discovery of this inedible muffin and began to worship it as a god. And pretty soon this muffin began popping up in every single campaign that we ran. Because, and here's the kicker, Mark was playing Reginald Moosetovitch the 17th. I'm almost certain it was the 17th, but I don't really remember. So almost everybody else in my group of friends decided to make a different Reginald character. Whether or not they actually played it at any time, text message. Whether or not they actually got to play that character at any time was a different story, but my friends were the kind of people that were so into D&D, we would just make character builds for fun, and so almost everybody made a Reginald Moosetovitch. I think I was Reginald... Text messages. I made Reginald Moosetovitch the 4th. He was going for the Halfling Outrider Prestige class. And then another one of my friends, we'll call her Anna, made another Reginald Moosetovitch, who was actually a girl, but her parents were so ashamed of her being a girl. They wanted a boy so bad that they named her Reginald anyway. And she hated being called Reginald. She insisted that she be called Regina. And then there was another Reginald Moosetovitch who was a druid, and this druid had a giant dire bear as an animal companion and rode it around like a mount. And this Reginald actually asked the bear what its name was, using like a spell that allows you to talk to animals, but the thing is the bear is not all that intelligent, so it just went, bear named Bear. So the bear's name was bear named Bear. It just got ridiculous. And every time there was a Reginald in the campaign, this muffin would pop up, this inedible muffin, which we eventually determined was like some kind of ancient artifact. Like it had been made by some deity who really liked muffins, and then for some reason decided that they wanted to make one that was impossible to eat, and so it had all this weird magical energy in it. It was stupid. It was really stupid. In a campaign that I ran, I actually had the players go through an entire temple, and at the end, the only reward was the inedible muffin. That was a really bad idea in hindsight. I shouldn't have done that, because that was basically a big F you to everyone in the party who wasn't the Reginald character. So eventually, our friend Jonathan just got sick of this. Jonathan was usually the DM, more often than not, because he was really good at DMing games. He was just fantastic at it. Some people are just born to be dungeon masters, and this guy was one of them. So eventually, he decided to run a Spelljammer campaign. I explained this before in my last D&D story video, but Spelljammer is basically Dungeons and Dragons in space. It's not technically space, it's called the Phlogiston. It's like the space between spaces. But basically, you have normal D&D characters flying around in this space between spaces in like these steampunk style airships, and there were 5 people in this party. There was myself, I was playing my bard Glimble Knocknigarian Bartholomew Papeshafe Esquire. Then there was Mark, who had actually brought back Reginald Moosetovitch the 17th. Actually, you know what, I think it might have been the 27th. 27th sounds right. And then we had a fighter, a druid, and a rogue as well. So we were flying around the Phlogiston, and the entire point of the Spelljammer campaign is to find and basically do whatever you want with the eponymous Spelljammer ship. The Spelljammer ship is this absolutely enormous ship. It's like the size of a city. And we actually ended up encountering a different Reginald who was controlled by the DM in this campaign. It was Reginald Moosetovitch, like the 513th or something like that. It was like ridiculously far in the future. And so he had like futuristic weapons. He had like a ray gun. It was weird. So eventually we find the Spelljammer ship, and our ship up until this point has been running on magical energy from the Inedible Muffin. Ships in the Spelljammer campaign use magical energy as a fuel source. You can either cast spells directly into the engine, or you can feed it magical items, and it will eventually consume those magical items, unless the magical item is really powerful, like if it's some ancient artifact, and then it can power a ship indefinitely, depending on the ship's size. And so we get inside the Spelljammer, and we find it almost entirely deserted. Most of the things we find in here are dead. And the only things that were left were like either really powerful characters or really nasty monsters. Like there was an entire deck that was completely overrun with beholders, and it was depowered. It was basically drifting aimlessly through the Phlogiston. And so of course, because this is the kind of party we are, we figured, we gotta take control of this ship. This thing is freaking awesome. So we were able to make a special potion that puts reflective energy on your eyes. So all of the beholders, like gaze attacks, were basically being reflected back at it. So we defeated all these beholders, we like killed a bunch of stuff, and eventually we find our way to the engine room. And the whole thing was covered in like engine residue and sludge that was like ridiculously poisonous, but we finally, eventually, I forget how, but we managed to get over to the middle platform. There were no bridges over to it. The middle platform where we would be able to put fuel into the ship in order to power it up. And this is the point where we find that the entire purpose of this campaign was to destroy the Inedible Muffin. Jonathan had had enough of this freaking muffin. He wanted this damn thing gone. So we feed the muffin to the Spelljammer, and the engine actually retaliates against us for a moment. And we managed to beat the thing, and then the ship calmed down and the engine, you know, powered up, and the muffin came back out. But it had been changed. It had become a lesser artifact called the Edible Muffin. And so we split it between the 5 of us. Everybody took a big bite, and the benefits that this thing gave us were like insane. We immediately gained 2 levels for one thing, and we also got the ability to briefly stop time, and we each gained a special benefit that was specific to our character. Like the rogue, who was a halfling, he had like these spider legs, long story, and he got the ability to make sneak attacks with these spider legs, and so this guy could make like 6 sneak attacks in 1 round. It was just ridiculous. I can't remember what the bard's special ability was, and I also can't remember what the fighter's special ability was. The druid, his tiger became a dire tiger, and he got the ability to basically do healing spells just by making a heal check. And my character gained a +6 bonus to everything whenever he was doing something awesome, or whenever he was doing something show-offy. Basically, he would get a bonus to attack, to damage, to saves, to skill checks, whatever. Like, we had this giant skeleton that would ferry us around on worlds. Again, long freaking story. We would basically get up inside this thing's skull and ribcage, and we would just kind of ride it around, and it would carry us across terrains. It was a really weird campaign. And Glimble actually made a hammock inside its ribs. And there was this one point where we were like getting down out of the skeleton to investigate this pyramid, and everybody else just had the skeleton raise the hand to the eye socket, and they just jumped out onto the fingers and he set them down. But for me, I actually had him put his hand down on the pyramid, and I like flipped down out of the ribcage and like did a Tarzan grind all the way down the arm, and then just did like a little front flip off the finger and landed right next to all of them. He was very, very good at acrobatics, this bard, and so I would gain bonuses whenever I did stuff like that. So we finally ate the Inedible Muffin, and it was gone and destroyed forever, and it had powered the ship for like 2 months or something like that, so we flew off into the stars, and that was the end of the campaign. And really, I'm not sure if this story has a point. I guess it has a point in that when you're a dungeon master, you really gotta be on your toes, because you never know what kind of weird thing your players are going to latch onto. You never know what kind of thing is going to end up having some weird, lasting impact on your campaign, and even on other campaigns that you would have never expected. And the Inedible Muffin was just that. It was one of those weird things that the dungeon master never saw coming, but just had to figure out a way to deal with it. And eventually Jonathan just said, you know what, we're done. I'm killing this thing. And I'm not saying that that's always the best way to handle that kind of thing, but you gotta be prepared, I guess, is the moral of this story. If you're the DM, you gotta be prepared for the weird stuff. So that's pretty much everything I have to say. That is the story of the Inedible Muffin. And until next time, Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies, I will see you later.